It is my pleasure to introduce to you Peter Bolland. I assume Dr. Peter Bolland? No? Okay. But wise beyond a doctor, right? That's all of us. I'm sorry, that was embarrassing. I should have done that in advance. When the Worship Arts and Music Ministry talked about who would preach today, Larry Brunton, who follows Peter online, immediately said, see if Peter's available. And I called him, he immediately responded back, we had a nice Zoom, and I feel like we created a friendship within the last couple of months. So I'm thrilled for Peter to be here and to share with us his message today.
Good morning, everyone. I've never been here before. A newcomer. I signed the book when I walked in. But I've never been here before, but I feel like I've always been here. And that has to do with your beautiful, welcoming spirit and open hearts. And I'm so grateful to be experiencing that here with you today. So my talk today is called What Letting Go Really Means. And throughout the world's wisdom traditions, we hear this message again and again, right? Surrender, let go. The Hindus call it renunciation. In Buddhism, we call it non-attachment. In the Chinese wisdom tradition of Taoism, in the Tao Te Ching, it goes by the name Wu Wei, which means literally not doing, but it really means creative letting be, engagement with the phenomenal realm around us without attachment to the outcomes, without trying to control what happens next. In the Christian tradition, it's known often as kenosis, like that passage you just heard from one of Paul's letters, where he describes Jesus emptying himself out. And in the recovery movement, folks are fond of saying, let go and let God. And there's that song from Frozen that you're already thinking about, let it go, let it go. Maybe we should have worked that in today. Nah, we're all a little bit over that song. It has 615 million views on YouTube, the Demi Lovato version. I know one of those is you. So, and it turns out, I looked at that song yesterday, it's got nothing to do with our talk today, actually. It's about someone letting go of social, never mind what that song's about. But we're thinking of something a little different today. So what are we exactly being counseled to let go of, and why? And even if we wanted to, how would we go about doing it? So I'm thinking back to Mahatma Gandhi, the great Indian revolutionary and ethical teacher and activist and lawyer and politician and spiritual, Gandhi. And one time he was stopped by a reporter who stuck a mic in his face and said, "What's your philosophy of life in 3 words?" Because journalists, they have to get right to the point, right? And Gandhi, without hesitating, said, "Renounce and enjoy." And what Gandhi was really doing there, he later discussed, was giving that reporter a 3-word summary of his favorite Upanishad, the Isha Upanishad. And the Upanishads are these ancient Indian texts from 600-700 BC, all about ultimate reality and our beingness in it. And so what Gandhi was telegraphing to us in that 3-word tweet, so to speak, was this idea of letting go. Renunciation means letting go. And in Hinduism, you pull on that thread of what does renunciation mean, and all kinds of beautiful tapestries come into view. In Hinduism, the Sanskrit word for renunciation is tyaga, and it means things like surrender or to give forth in generosity, forsaking, resigning, releasing, all those kinds of words, tyaga. And in English, we just translate it as renunciation. And of course, at the heart of the Hindu tradition, many of you know, is this idea that ultimate reality, Brahman, not a personified God, but the ground of being itself, formless, sacred, out of which all forms, like the gods and like us, arise, and to which we all return. Brahman. The ocean of which we are all just waves. And that idea is at the heart of the Hindu metaphysical philosophy and all through the Upanishads. So when we talk about renunciation, that's an important part. That it's all one, and everything, all forms, are an expression of the divine reality of Brahman. And each of us is an expression here in the field of time and forms of that eternal, formless, sacred essence. So out of this metaphysical foundation then, letting go means realizing that, knowing that. Letting go of my small definition of self, this body, my age, my race, this ego, this job title, all the things I know how to do, all the things I don't know how to do, all those specific, local, temporary expressions, as wonderful as they all are the surface beneath which is the oneness that we all share. And so letting go then means letting go of all of those specific qualities of this particular incarnation. Letting go is just another way of saying getting out of my own way. And why would it be a good idea to let go? Well, I'll tell you a little story. Back in 1977, I was 19 years old. I'll spare you the math. I'm 64. I have a feeling a couple of you might be from my general generation. And I had 1 year of community college under my belt, taking my first philosophy classes, hearing about things like the Upanishads and the Tao Te Ching and the mystical traditions of the Christian tradition and Judaism and all the rest. And I was falling in love with all that. That's a story for another day. But one night, me and my two friends, Steve Morton and Paul Lively, went to see this brand new movie that had just come out. This is all happening in Ventura, California. So we took a little road trip 45 minutes north to Santa Barbara to the Libero Theater, where they were premiering a new film that had just come out that nobody had heard of or cared about called Star Wars. The first Star Wars movie, now annoyingly forever known as Episode 4, etc. Exactly, A New Hope. But back then it was just Star Wars, and just a one-off, and no one knew that it was going to turn into this big thing. But I remember that night, and in the climactic, spoiler alert, need not be said for a 1977 movie, right? I'm just going to tell you how it ends. So in the final climactic scene, when our hero Luke Skywalker and his fellow Rebel Alliance fighters are trying to perform what we call in our study of the hero's journey in world mythology, we call it the impossible task. Frodo taking the ring through Mordor. Dorothy getting the Wicked Witch's broom. The hero is always given a job that cannot be done. And then they go do it. So Luke Skywalker and his friends are trying to blow up the Death Star, which is a fortress built by the fascist empire that is going to destroy their planet. And the only hope they have is shooting a missile down the exhaust port, this impossible tiny target. And they're missing. And finally, our hero, Luke Skywalker, turns off his computer missile guidance system. And everybody back at base is going, oh, he turned off his computer missile guidance system. And they said, what are you doing? He's like, I got this. And he fires off a couple missiles, they miss. He fires off a couple more, they go right down. And that is because his spiritual master, Obi-Wan Kenobi, drifted in a vision and told him these immortal words. Use the Force, Luke. Let go. And George Lucas, the writer, is really doing a beautiful thing there, because Lucas is studying with Joseph Campbell. He's channeling everything he knows about the Tao Te Ching and about Advaita Vedanta and non-duality and Upanishads and the hero's journey and Buddhism. And he's putting that all in this little rocket opera called Star Wars. And he taught us all what Wu Wei means in that scene. The Taoist idea of acting without attachment to the outcomes of actions. As soon as you start caring about the outcome, you get into your head and you fail. But only, as his spiritual guru, Obi-Wan, told him, only when you let go. And I'll put it more bluntly, only when you don't care whether you hit it or not. Only when you go, as Jesus said, into the mind of a child, and it is just play. And as Krishna teaches us in the Bhagavad Gita, you have the right to work, but you do not have the right to the fruits of work. To work without attachment to outcomes. I know this is so alien to many of us. We work for outcomes. I plant tomatoes because I want some tomatoes for my caprese salad in August. I don't plant tomatoes and go, maybe I won't get any tomatoes, who cares? I just like getting dirty and sweaty in the sun. We work for outcomes. So this is a spiritual teaching we find everywhere, even in pop culture now. This idea of letting go. That's renunciation. That's exactly what Gandhi meant. Gandhi's famous line, right? It is for us to do the work, but the results are always in God's hands. That's the same idea. And that's what he took from the Isha Upanishad that he distilled down into that 3-word little thing, renounce and enjoy. The reason you are letting go, the reason you are surrendering is because something better, something bigger is available to work through you. Call it grace, call it whatever you want. But all of your busyness and all of your efforting is interfering with the sacred flow that is always welling up from deep inside us and from all around us. And that is why all the myths and scriptures and novels and movies and graphic novels and serialized television and comic books have been trying to teach us our whole lives. And the second half of Gandhi's little recipe there, renounce and enjoy, is enjoy. Let's not overlook that one. That when you let go, and when you, as my friend Anday says, when you allow it to be easy, allow it to be easy. Those 5 words are medicine to me. Whenever I'm in an airport and I find out my flight is delayed 6 hours, and I get all mad and angry and the knot starts to tighten in my heart, I think of my friend Anne and her 5 words, allow it to be easy. Oh, I just got a 5-hour break. I'm going to go eat more food. Look at as much as Dallas as I get to see today from the airport. Allow it to be easy. That's letting go. And then I trade my pain for joy. When you let go and when you allow it to be easy, an effortless joyfulness begins to arise in your life. Why? Because joy, or in Sanskrit again, ananda or bliss, is our essential nature. And to experience it, it's more about removing the impediments and allowing it to rise up. I don't have to know what happiness is. I don't have to conceptually understand it. I don't have to hunt it down and drag it back to my cave. I don't have to possess it or even understand what it is. Happiness, joy, well-being are our natural state when we let go. And on what authority am I proclaiming all these things? This is what I learn in all these traditions, but of course, as Gandhi would say, and Buddha too, you must always test these truth claims in the light of your own experience. Not because some guy given the lectern today said it, but because now you can go forth and experiment with these claims in your own life and test their veracity. And the act of letting go removes the impediments that block bliss from taking its rightful place in our hearts, minds, and bodies. But I'm with you. I don't feel so blissful these days. And this is not a philosophy of sticking your head in a hole in the ground and hiding from what is happening. I feel troubled. I feel deeply troubled often, and angry, and resentful. I'm just mad. And that's what drove me to bring these ideas to you this morning, to discuss these ideas, to think through these ideas with you today. This looming sense that things are not okay. And it seems like the last thing we should do is surrender and let go. Part of me is saying, stand up, be heard, fight. Resist, persist, and stay angry. Let's see if there's a middle path between these two energies by which we can thread through these compelling and competing extremes and navigate these difficult times. Again, Gandhi's a good role model because he was facing some big problems too. And so it turns out that, contrary to first impression, renunciation is not passivity. It's not acquiescence. It is action without attachment to the fruits of action again. Now, in the Buddhist tradition, we are counseled to practice non-attachment. And again, this idea needs a little unpacking. When my students, my day job is teaching world religions and philosophy and Asian philosophy and ethics at Southwestern College in Chula Vista. And so for 31 years now, I've been in the college classroom going through all these ideas with beautiful folks. And when my students first learn about the Buddhist practice of non-attachment, they're often confused, and they say things like, do you mean I'm not supposed to care about anything? Like I should just disconnect from everything? Turn off my empathy? And of course, anybody here with even a passing acquaintance with Buddhism would know that it's actually the opposite. That in loving kindness, in karuna, in compassion, in presence, in mindfulness, we are deeply bonded with others in ways that we cannot be when we are attached to ego and outcomes. That when we let go, we find ourselves connecting with everybody in a deeper, richer, more present way by simply acknowledging that we don't own any of this, that we don't control any of this. Let's look at it through the lens of our own experience. Buddhism counsels us to deepen into the understanding that all forms are impermanent, including my own ego, my own body, that there is nothing to grasp, and that there is no one to do the grasping. There's a fundamental emptiness of form, the Buddhists teach us. Things rise up for a while, and then they melt back into the oneness. And all of our suffering comes from the mistaken ambition to freeze that process, to stop puppies from growing old and dying, to keep the people in political power that we want to have in political power, and when they're not, we suffer. We want to stop the flux and flow of all being and time. But I want to, again, offer you some homework. Look at this through the lens of your own experience. Is it possible, really, to love without ownership, without the illusion of control? Of course it is. And in Buddhism, it's understood that we generate most of our own suffering and dissatisfaction by having expectations, demands, and by being attached to specific outcomes. So again, for the Buddhists, letting go means letting go of the illusion that I'm in charge, that I'm in control. When I get stuck in a traffic jam, my options are to get angry at all these people in front of me, or to simply say, oh, this is happening. I'm not the boss of traffic. I don't get to have the traffic that my ego demands. So the suffering is not coming from the traffic. The suffering is coming from this weird trip that I'm on, that I get to dictate the conditions of everything around me. What people say, what they do, the weather, it's too hot, it's too cold. That's the big pitch of Buddhism, that our suffering comes from craving and attachment. So when Buddhists counsel us to let go, they are saying, do a little better at coming into what is, instead of always living in the what should be. I had a dog named Boone. He was a Brittany Spaniel. He was gorgeous. And we picked him up from a breeder out in Lakeside who was packing up his breeding operation and moving back to Missouri, and he was getting rid of one of his main sires, our acquisition, Boone. He was 3 years old when we got him, had never been inside a house, lived in a chain link run out in the back, and had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pedigree puppies. And he was raised as a puppy around shotguns to be a hunting dog, So one good thing about Boone was he didn't care about fireworks at all. So we had a great run with Boone, but we brought him home, and it was tough at first. He tore up a lot of stuff. He tore up the curtains. He tore up the screens, and he did some damage, but he finally learned how to be a suburban house dog after a couple of years of gentle work with him. And we had a great run together, and he lived a long time. But that day came, of course, when he was growing old and he couldn't walk very well anymore. And then it became difficult for him to breathe. And he stopped eating. You know what I'm talking about. He was dying. And so now the question becomes, for all of us who love our animals, when out of mercy do you let your dog die with dignity? When do you get medical help to let your dog stop suffering? And you're agonized. You don't want to do it too soon because it's inconvenient. And you don't want to go too long out of some weird sense of keeping him around. And he just tuned into their body. He was really telling me that, the light was gone from his eyes. He stopped eating, could barely get up. He would sit on the floor and point his nose straight to the ceiling so we could open his air passages and just get air. So after that last terrible night, my wife and I brought him to the vet the next day, and we go into the exam room and we sit on the ground, and our vet was so great, and the vet tech, Dr. Valerie and Simon came out, and they had a warm towel on the ground for us. We put him on the towel, and she had that big pink syringe, and he already had an IV in his paw from some blood work, and the vet said, "Take as long as you want." And we did, and Boone's looking at me, and he's looking at the vet, and I just said, "Okay." And she put the syringe in the shunt and gave him that big pink syringe. And Boone looked up at me, and his eyelids got heavy, and he just went limp, and he died in my arms. And I was bawling in front of some virtual strangers. But I wouldn't miss that moment for the world, as agonizingly, grievingly painful as it was. Because I made that deal with Boone when I brought him home. When he jumped up in my truck that first day, 12 years earlier, you make a deal with your dog, right? You say, "Look, you and me to the end. I'm bringing you into my life. We're going to fall so hard in love with each other, and it's going to be wonderful, but there's that terrible day at the end." And so letting go is that. It's tearful, but it's what makes love possible. And what about in Christianity, finally? In the Christian contemplative tradition, there's this word kenosis. In Greek, it means to empty out, and we saw it in our reading today in Paul's letter to the Philippians, chapter 2, verse 6. Paul is once again trying to explain the mystery of Jesus to these people with these letters. He's struggling. And he says, "Though he was in the form of God, he did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant and being born in human likeness." Now, I will leave it to the theologians above my pay grade to parse out what all of that means, but I'm caught for our work this morning by this fact that in the Christian contemplative tradition, the idea of emptying out became a key part of monastic practice. And for them, for the Christian mystics and the monks and the nuns, the desert fathers, the desert mothers, for them, it came to mean self-emptying. That is, to continually pour our love out as if it were an inexhaustible spring, because it is. I can let go and empty out because I know that I will always be filled again and again and again, and that grace pours forth continually. And in the end, that's all faith really means, maybe, is to understand that and to leave room for that. The sacred backfill. As you're pouring out, more is always entering in. And so the only sane stance would be then openness. To release more of your love out and to be able to receive more of the love in. In fact, the Trinity is often understood that way in mystical Christianity, right? That the Father is always pouring all of Himself into the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit is always pouring all of itself into the Son, and the Son is always pouring all of Himself into the Father, and so on and so on. Each of the three moments of the Trinity are emptying themselves out into the other, and on it goes. And in conservative Christianity, where Jesus is the only incarnation of God, that means one thing. But in more progressive Christianity, I'm thinking of Richard Rohr, all of this is the incarnation. And that shifts it into almost a Vedanta perspective. So in the end, all of this is just a divine reality without possession or without stasis. It is only movement, it is only life. And to fail to participate in the communal, universal emptying out is to miss out on the grace of being alive. And what are some of the things that you and I can safely let go of? Well, I want to let go of the illusion that I'm in control. I want to let go of a lot of my concepts and opinions. There's that wonderful Zen saying, don't seek enlightenment, just get rid of all your opinions. I want to get rid of my judgments of others. I want to empty that out. I want to leave those behind. I'm always wrong. My judgments always change when I get to know more. I want to let go of my unrealistic expectations and my unreasonable cravings. I want to let go of my endless fears and my endless worst-case scenarios. I want to let go of my feelings of despair and hopelessness when I look at events around me. I don't want to hold that. I want to feel it, notice it, and then I'm going to release it. Renounce and enjoy. What the great 20th century teacher Krishnamurti called choiceless awareness. What would it be like to come into every moment for the rest of today and practice choiceless awareness? To just be aware of what's happening without making a decision about it, without putting that person in a box, without creating a hierarchy where this is better than that. Choiceless awareness. That's another level of what letting go really means. The great Christian mystic Meister Eckhart put it this way, that we do not come to know God by a process of addition, but by a process of subtraction. And it is the great spiritual teaching of all the traditions that we only get to keep what we let go of. And the mind will never understand that paradox. It makes no sense. We think of it as a zero-sum game. But if you want a friend, be a friend, right? If you want love, give love. All those teachings. If you want more material abundance in your life, get more generous. Create that circulation. That's what emptying out means. And it's a paradox the mind will never understand, but it's a great mystery that the heart never tires of experiencing. Explore that in your own life today and the rest of the week and see what you stumble over. Thanks so much. Namaste.